Welcome to the Aced It podcast, where we turn science into sense. This is our 12th season of Aced It, and we're brought to you via the Justice Community Overdose Innovation Network, or JCOIN. I would like to celebrate a bit this season, for as we start season 12, we've reached 21,000 downloads and counting. Woohoo! Yeah, not because we're famous, certainly not, but because that means at least 21,000 times our listeners have learned something about overdose, opioids, opioid use disorder, medication-assisted treatment, and/or harm reduction. And that, my friends, warms my very grateful heart. Also, just a quick plug for a few other JCOIN features that you might not know about. Did you know you can get technical assistance for your organization from the experts at JCOIN for free? And did you know you can apply for small research grants to help fund innovative study ideas? Yep, through JCOIN. And did you know you can apply to be a JCOIN LEAP scholar or investigator to improve your own skills? Also through JCOIN. If you didn't know about these things, check out our website, jcoinctc.org, and learn about the many JCOIN offerings beyond Aced It that may help you learn and grow in ways that improve lives. With that, I'm honored that you're with us. I'm Danielle Rudes, your host, and this is Aced It. This season of the Aced It podcast, we're talking all about roles, responsibilities, and reactions to overdose. By that, I mean we're going to examine how people in different environments and roles prevent and/or react to overdoses. Today, we're diving into how prison and jail staff respond and react to overdoses among incarcerated people. Overdose fatalities are a growing concern within correctional facilities, fueled in large part by the presence of fentanyl and other synthetic opioids. According to the National Public Radio reporting of the Bureau of Justice Statistics data from 2001 to 2018, overdose deaths in state prisons rose by more than 600%, and overdose deaths in county jails increased by more than 200%. In a 2023 study by Riccardelli and colleagues, 15% of Canadian correctional staff reported encountering fentanyl or carfentanil at least monthly. 7% said they had responded to a fentanyl overdose at least once a month. These numbers highlight the urgent need for interventions like naloxone, a medication that can reverse opioid overdoses. In this episode, we'll talk about various harm reduction strategies that have been implemented in prisons and jails, including how staff feel about these strategies. Then we'll shift gears to begin talking about the emotional toll that these incidents take on correctional staff. Let's start with naloxone, a life-saving medication that can reverse opioid overdoses. In a study by Riccardelli and colleagues 2023, they surveyed 257 Canadian correctional staff and found that most recognized the need for naloxone, yet many felt inadequately trained to administer it. The pressure of responding to an overdose in a high-stakes environment added to their concerns. Despite this, naloxone remains a key tool in harm reduction. Naloxone vending machines have been introduced in some county jails, as described by Victor and colleagues 2024. These machines provide free naloxone to people released and visitors. In Michigan, jails that implemented these vending machines saw a 63.5% increase in naloxone distribution, demonstrating that a demand for and willingness to use this harm reduction method is present. Qualitative interviews revealed that prior naloxone distribution efforts and foundational knowledge about opioids, overdose, and naloxone are facilitators of vending machine implementation. Beyond naloxone, overdose education and naloxone distribution programs have been successfully implemented in jails, such as in San Francisco, as studied by Wenger and colleagues 2019. In that program, 67% of participants received naloxone upon release, and nearly half sought refills from community programs afterward, showing a continued reliance on harm reduction strategies post-incarceration. Importantly, 32% reported reversing an overdose with that medication, highlighting how life-saving naloxone access can be. In a different study, Ozer and colleagues 2024 analyzed meeting minutes with jail stakeholders to understand barriers and facilitators to overdose education and naloxone distribution in county jails in Kentucky during COVID, and found that staffing shortages, COVID-era disruptions in programming, and the lack of social distancing technology was a barrier to implementation, while administrative support, prioritization of the program, and collaboration between jail providers and community providers were all facilitators to implementation. Overdose prevention sites are another controversial but potentially effective approach. Riccardelli and colleagues 2024 interviewed 135 federal Canadian prison staff to understand the positionalities and challenges associated with implementing overdose prevention sites in prison. Through their interviews, the authors found that while some correctional officers supported prevention sites as a harm reduction tool, others believed they contradicted the goal of rehabilitation. For example, one staff member said, quote, "They're here to be rehabilitated, so I don't understand why we're giving them sites just to do drugs. To me, that's not rehabilitation. I look more at it like a methadone program for trying to get them off an opioid than what they're doing with the safe injection sites," unquote. And other staff, like this one, said, quote, "Prevention sites, that goes against our correctional plan of rehabilitation. How are we going to rehabilitate them, and how are we going to get them off the drugs if they're allowed to stay on it?" Unquote. However, education played a role in shifting attitudes. Officers who learned more about OPS, or overdose prevention sites, and harm reduction became more favorable toward them. Finally, prison needle exchange programs have faced resistance from staff. Johnston and colleagues 2024 interviewed 135 correctional officers at the federal level in Canada to understand officers' levels of support and opposition to needle exchange programs. While the authors did note that roughly 11% of the sample was supportive of the program, as captured in the words of one staff member who said, quote, "Why not give them the resources to make sure they use in a safe way," unquote. Overwhelmingly, the authors found that officers were largely opposed to prison needle exchange programs due to concerns about rehabilitation and safety. Predominantly, officers thought that needle exchange programs enabled drug use rather than promoting recovery. For example, one staff member said, quote, "We should be making it as hard as possible for them, not easier," unquote. And another said, quote, "If you come to prison, there should be a program to wean you off of all drugs. To me, rehabilitation is getting you clean, getting you sober, so you go back into society and function and not just feed the habit," unquote. Officers also reported serious safety concerns about the program, saying that they saw incarcerated people openly sharing dirty needles and that they were worried about being pricked by dirty needles during routine responsibilities like cell searches, or in some instances were scared of dirty needles being used as weapons against staff or other incarcerated people. Finally, staff were clear that using needles in cells, as opposed to in the designated areas, was not a good idea because it made people more prone to overdose since they were alone and away from staff oversight. Okay, now that we've covered the different harm reduction strategies currently being used in prisons and jails, as well as staff perspectives on these strategies, let's turn to the emotional and psychological impact of overdoses and deaths in custody on correctional staff. The reality is that responding to overdoses and, in some cases, deaths can be deeply traumatic for prison and jail staff. Barry, 2017, studied Irish prison officers' reactions to death in custody and found that many went into what they called autopilot mode during these incidents. Their focus was on restoring order, but emotional processing was limited. Expressions of sadness were often suppressed because they violated cultural norms. Some staff talked about being empathetic, but were careful not to be too empathetic by using brief and neutral statements that didn't include any personal sentiments. Often, staff turned to humor as a coping mechanism. It was also helpful for staff's processing to be able to, quote, "leave work at work," unquote. For many officers, balancing their professional role with the emotional toll of overdoses is a challenge. While they are expected to maintain order and safety, they also face the human reality of addiction and loss. The stigma surrounding emotional expression in correctional work can make it even more difficult for staff to process these experiences. All right, with that, we've reached the end of our episode on prison and jail staff roles, responsibilities, and reactions to overdose. Harm reduction strategies in jails and prisons remain a complex and evolving issue. While naloxone, overdose prevention sites, and needle exchange programs have proven benefits, they also face stiff resistance due to concerns about rehabilitation and safety. At the same time, the emotional burden on correctional staff highlights the need for better training, mental health support, and policy clarity. As we move forward, a key takeaway is that education and awareness can help shift staff perspectives. Understanding harm reduction as a tool for safety, not just for incarcerated people, but for staff as well, may lead to more widespread acceptance and implementation. I hope you learned something from this episode, and I'll talk to you next time when we'll be talking about the experiences of staff who work in community corrections. Until then, take care. Thank you for listening to the ACEDIT podcast. We love hearing from you. So if you have comments, topics to suggest, or some science you'd like us to cover in a future season, please write to me, Danielle Roods, at Sam Houston State University. My email is droods, D-R-U-D-E-S, at shsu.edu. And of course, thank you to the Justice Community Overdose Innovation Network, or JCOIN's, Coordination and Translation Center, funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, housed at George Mason University, where this podcast originated. Thank you to our fabulous scriptwriters and also my fantastic doctoral students, Bryce Kushmerek-McCune and Jalen Magana. And a huge and heartfelt thank you to the team at Flunky LLC for their wonderful production as always. Remember to check out our website, jcoinctc.org, for more cool JCoin features and opportunities. And tune in again soon for another episode of ACEDIT.